Once again, thanks everyone for joining us for this call with Terry Rynne about his book, Gandhi and Jesus, The Saving Power of Nonviolence. I'm, again, very grateful for each one of you to join us. We've so far got 18 people on the call, and more will be arriving. First, I guess I want to introduce Terry. Terry's bio, just basically from the book, I'll present, and then I'll allow Terry to give a little bit more background from his perspective. So Terry is the founder of the Marquette University Center for Peace Building and a teacher of peace studies. He retired as founder and president of the Rynne Marketing Group, a nationally recognized consulting firm that has served more than 600 leading hospitals and healthcare organizations. So once he retired, he earned a PhD in theology and pursued his passion for peace. And Terry does speaking events to promote nonviolence for us at Bene as well. So we're very grateful for him doing that. And I'm going to open it up a little bit later in this call for questions and answers. And in the meantime, I think I'm going to just go ahead and mute everybody. That way we don't have any disturbance. But I'm going to go ahead and invite Terry to share a little bit about himself, Terry, and a little bit about why you wrote this book. What is this book about? Why was it important for you to write it? And then we'll go into some more Q&A. So I'll turn it over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you for tuning in and appreciating Gandhi, especially as he helps us understand the message and the life of Jesus, as they definitely shed light on one another. I read a book many years ago, I think it was 1969, by James Douglas called The Nonviolent Cross. And it swept me away with its description of Gandhi. It was the first exposure that I'd had in many ways, especially when he described what people did in the middle of the Salt March. You know, we can come back to that because it's certainly key in understanding not only Gandhi's thought, but also how it played out historically. He described the people who were resisting the law against people making their own salt. Salt was an absolute necessity for any human being, but especially in that hot country. People can't live without salt, and the British had a monopoly on salt. And so Gandhi's famous Salt March. But what Webb Miller, an AP correspondent, described, he was one of thousands of reporters on the scene at that time. He described the assault on the salt depot with the Pathan police with their steel-tipped clubs ready to knock down a wave of 4 nonviolent resistors, breaking their skulls, breaking their shoulders, and another 4 coming forward, and another 4 coming forward. Altogether, 200 resistors came to the gates of the salt depot and were dealt with that way. And I was so impressed by the bravery of people. It's what first intrigued me. What is this about? So for years, I read about Gandhi, and I finally got a chance to go back to Marquette, where I was all but dissertation. This is 14 years ago now. And I went to the head of the theology department, said, I'd like to finish my dissertation. And he said, in Jesuit language, well, we have to see if your theological synapses are still firing, which was his language for whether you can still think. And so I completed a couple guided reading courses and demonstrated proficiency with my synapses. So I was able to start writing at that time. I was very fortunate. Most people in doing a doctorate have to do it in the middle of raising children, or now I was free, but I did think I had sold my company, was ready to dive in. I did think I would have to be going to Northwestern, where I got an MBA, could use the library, because Gandhi's collected works are 100 volumes, because he wrote for a newspaper for most of his life. So his collected works are quite substantial. And I got a marvelous note, serendipitously, from a blueberry farmer in Maine, who offers all of Gandhi's works and all the works about Gandhi. They're contained in a big barn on his property. And he offered the 100 volumes of the collected works of Gandhi for $1,500. And so I was able to have them right here. They're all around this room in back of me tonight. So in appreciating Gandhi in depth, I had to make a couple important, what I thought, connections. One, and I see Rick is already asking a question about this. It always bothered me the way we talked about salvation in Christian theology. And you know how it goes. We had committed an infinite offense against God, and therefore it could only be a God-man who could work recompense and reconcile us to God. So God sent his only son to die on the cross to save us from our sins. And I thought, is this divine child abuse? I mean, it turns out it's called the most successful theological construct in history, written by Anselm Beck 1,400 years ago. And it has lasted. It just somehow has penetrated a lot of Christian denominations thinking about salvation. So Jesus' death on the cross saved us. All by itself, standing alone, nothing to do with history, nothing to do with his life. For example, our creeds, the Apostle Creed, the Nicene Creed. Apostles' Creed goes, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Nicene Creed says, born of the Virgin Mary, became man, suffered under Pontius Pilate, died, and was buried. Do any of you recognize what's missing? Born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. What about his life? You know, his life is normative for us, the way he lived and invited us to live. So that really is, if you made it to the last chapter of the book, what I was trying to redo and point out, that Jesus' life was a life of disciplined, nonviolent action against injustice. He died because of the way he lived. And he lived in a way very similar to what Gandhi demonstrates for us, boldly, bravely, peacefully, loving his enemies, all through his life right to the end. So that's the fundamental two reasons why I wrote the book.
Thank you, Terry. Go ahead. Were you going to say one more?
No, please.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to get to maybe this question that David wrote. So David writes that Gandhi's stand on resisting injustice with doing so violently being better than doing nothing, and doing so non-violently being far better is clear. What do you think Jesus would think of that?
And is that the same question that asks about just war theory, David?
It looks like it. Maybe let me unmute David and see if he would like to. David, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I just ask a lot of questions. So after I asked the Gandhi question, then I thought of the just war theory question. They're kind of related, but not exactly.
Mhm.
Well, I went on because of this interest to continue the train of thought and wrote a second book, Jesus Christ Peacemaker, a new theology of peace. And one of the sections of that book is on Augustine. A lot of people think, many people understand that the early church was creatively, in a very disciplined way, living the Sermon on the Mount, loving your enemies, doing good to those who persecute you. The first major political decision that Christians, they weren't called that then, but the followers of Jesus had to make was whether they would participate in the revolt against Rome. And you know the Pharisees participated, except for one small group that started a different branch of Judaism, focusing on the Torah and doing without the temple. But most of the Pharisees, all of the Essenes, entered the revolt against Rome in the year 66, leading to the total destruction, of course, of the temple in 70. The other major political decision that the early gathering church needed to make was how would they respond to violent persecution. And if you read the fathers of the church, without an exception for those first three centuries, you find the Sermon on the Mount, turn one cheek to the other, someone strikes you, go a second mile, surprise people by the way you live, especially in the face of violence. Tertullian, for example, a crusty lawyer from Northern Africa, converted to Christianity, seeing how Christians dealt with persecution. Julian the Apostate, called now retrospectively, he was the nephew and the third in line eventually behind Constantine, so became an emperor, tried to restore the pagan religion into Rome. And he said, we don't understand these people. They not only help one another and cherish one another, especially those that are impoverished, they help us as well, meaning the pagan Romans. So their way of life was a stunning example to us. If you get back inside it, read the fathers, read Ignatius of Antioch. In year 110, he knew John the disciple personally. He wrote 5 letters as he was being dragged to Rome by 10 Roman soldiers, one to Polycarp. I don't see that name too often these days, Polycarp. But Polycarp was a bishop of Smyrna. Antioch was the third largest city in the Roman Empire. And he said to the community of Rome, please don't try to interrupt what is happening. I am glad to go as bread. I will be finely sifted through the teeth of the animals. So it is stunning. So you have to start with that and say, how did it change? Why from the end of the 3rd century, when no Christian belonged to the Roman army, until a century and a half later, after Augustine, only Christians belonged to the Roman army. How did that change happen? And a lot of people think it was Constantine. So there's a chapter in this second book on Constantine, and it explains that people were feeling no longer beleaguered and now could rise in the Roman Empire. And so they're perfectly, but Constantine, although never converting to Christianity, refused to use the power of the sword to force people into faith. He convened the Council of Nicaea. He stood against Arianism, but he refused to use the power of the Roman sword when it came to matters of belief. Along came Augustine. Read that chapter. It is very revealing when you understand Augustine's thought on three different fronts. He thought humanity was so corrupt. The power of the sword of Rome was needed to keep us from tearing one another apart. Second, he read the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, totally differently than the other fathers had. They all said, we see the difference between Jesus' message. We understand that there was a strong bent early in the history of Israel to slaughter, just as other tribes in their area did. But we see, the early fathers said, we see development in their thinking until you get to 2nd Isaiah. Augustine said, needing to defend Rome under attack, his own Hippo under attack by the Vandals from Spain, we have to use the power of the sword. God commanded it in the Jewish scriptures. Case is settled. His reading of the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, so different from the early fathers who founded their marching orders. He said it's only meant to encourage pure intentions. You can kill as long as you still love in your heart. And he needed to find a different method to guide people's thinking about war. And he found the just war principles in Cicero. He was a great classicist. So the just war theory, nothing to do with revelation or scripture. It's not theology. It's a bit of classical wisdom that has come down to us ever since. Was that a fall, or was that a development in Christian history? I mean, it's clear to me that once nonviolence was taken out of the arch of Christianity, Christianity collapsed, this is quoting Walter Wink, into a religion of personal salvation. So David, I hope I'm answering a little bit more in depth than you expected, but you know, the just war theory is fine. It is in its place for people who are, but for Christians who have the phenomenally stirring, powerful, effective message and example of Jesus, for us to settle for just war theory that is natural law thinking. There is a place for it. It's led us to things like the Geneva Conventions. People can agree on some of these principles, and that's a contribution, but don't trade it in for the basic, fundamental message of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.
Thanks, Terry. Let's see what other questions we might have in the group here. Since everybody's currently muted, if you have a specific question, maybe just raise your hand for those who are on video. Maybe for those who aren't on video, I'll just check in with you throughout the call here a little bit and see if you have any quick questions. Again, if there's any questions, let me know.
The book is called, of course, Gandhi and Jesus, and I'm not wanting to skip over, you know, the amazing teaching and life of Gandhi. So if somebody wants to explore that a little bit more.
I know one of one of the questions that kind of stood out for me was the basic idea that nonviolence, the word nonviolence, kind of pales in comparison to Gandhi's Satyagraha term. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about that, and if is there a word today that could compare in some fashion to Gandhi's Satyagraha, or is it best to just use Satyagraha as our term?
No, those are good questions. It's important to understand what Gandhi started with in his struggles in South Africa. You know, he led that fight for the Indians in South Africa for almost 20 years, from the age of 23 on. And at the beginning, they called what they were doing passive resistance. They took that from the suffragists in England. And one night, 1906, he was introduced to a group by a wealthy businessman who was sympathetic to their cause in Johannesburg. And he started this way. He said, "We are fortunate to have with us the leader of the Indian community. He and his colleagues have been using passive resistance as their only weapon, a weapon of the weak." And Gandhi knew right then and stood up and said, you know, we are not using the right terminology. In fact, I challenge our community to come up with a word that might express, preferably in one of our own languages, what we are about. He said, not only it is true that we are different from the suffragists who do some violence, get their point apart. You've seen us, we never commit violence on the people that are oppressing us. Secondly, we are not passive. We have done all that we can to resist, you know, writing, going to England, appearing before the Parliament. Queen Victoria is supposed to have said, every one of my citizens has the full gamut of civil rights, and it's not true in South Africa. And we try to make that point through print and exposition. We burned our draft cards. We've gone to jail. We are not passive. So his nephew came up with the word Satyagraha, firmness in a good cause. And he said, almost, Satyagraha, firmness in the truth. We can unpack that a bit, but nonviolence in comparison can come across, because it is an alpha privative, like the word ahimsa in Hindu. It's no himsa, no violence, nonviolence. I know in my thinking and writing, I prefer to say nonviolent direct action. You know, that expresses it. Mm-hmm. It's not just an attitude. When you look at it as this phenomenal instrument of cultural and political change, it's always nonviolent direct action. You have two alternatives: violent direct action, nonviolent direct action. Mm-hmm. If that helps.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, let's go to Rosalie. Hi, Rosalie.
Good evening, Rosalie.
We can't hear you. You're unmuted. I don't know if is your mic working okay? Hopefully we can get that to work. Well, while you're figuring that out, does anybody else have any questions? Those who aren't on video, maybe I'll just check in with a few folks. Peggy Wilson, do you have any questions? All right, let's see. We could go to this question also that that David wrote. And he said that when Jesus counseled his disciples to take a staff with them on their journeys, was he counseling the carrying of a weapon, the common weapon of peasants at the time?
For self-defense with that particular passage, he did. But later on, when he is commissioning the disciples, he says, because it's a whole different context then, he says to them, and don't take a staff, which was the weapon for protection, because now they're ready to go out in his name. Don't wear sandals, because if you have sandals, then you run away. And don't take a sack of money. Make sure that you give the opportunity to the town that you go to and bring peace to, that they can work hospitality back for you, building a Christian community, which is the exact opposite of the way zealot community, which is growing, operated. So it's meant to be a countersign to the building violence in his culture. You know, that's so overlooked by many people, just how extreme the violence was at Jesus' time and how it was intensifying. For example, when Herod the Great died, about the time just after Jesus' birth, Simon the Galilean led a revolt, destroyed the capital of Galilee, Sepphoris, which is 4 miles, an easy walk over the hills to Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. Destroyed Sepphoris, destroyed the armamentarium, took the arms, destroyed all the records of the poor that were kept there. People were being thrown off their lands. And Rome came. The general up in Syria came down with a division. And Josephus writes, that the Jewish historian of the time, he crucified 2,000 people around Sepphoris. That terrible punishment that people die from suffocation eventually. They can't pull themselves up any longer. They're, terrible instrument of fear to keep people in line. Well, then brigands began to roam the country. By the 40s and 50s of the Christian era, the Sicarii came into action with their short, sharp, curved swords. They would sidle up to people that they hated, oppressors. The first one they killed was the high priest Jonathan at the time. They just disemboweled them with that sword. So they grew stronger and stronger until the anger was so great that they revolted against Rome. And you know what happened from there. So Jesus is constantly aware of that. When he turned his face to Jerusalem and the disciples got so nervous because they knew he was walking into the maw of state-sponsored violence. And he said, I have to confront the leaders. And he arrived, and as he came into Jerusalem, he looked at the temple and he said, not one stone is going to be left on another. And he knew the violence that was building. And he said, in Luke, it says, if only you had known the ways of peace. In Matthew, he says, I wanted to gather you, Jerusalem, as a hen does her chicks. Your violence and your belief in separatism. I'm building an inclusive community, and I have an alternative to fight, flight, or accommodate that you currently think are the only alternatives. So his message is definitely consistently nonviolent direct action. He takes on the 3 major institutions of cultural violence as they were practiced at the time, the way the Torah was interpreted, the way that the temple was used, and the way the Sabbath was practiced. In Mark chapter 3, it's that early. You know the passage, the man with the withered arm comes into the synagogue. And Jesus turns to the Pharisees who are there to catch him. And he says, should I heal this man's arm? And they say, they don't respond. They just are so negative. And Mark writes, Jesus looked at them and was so disappointed and angry because he was always trying to break through and reach them. But he said to the man, stretch out your arm, and he healed him. And they were making that a gotcha moment, making the Sabbath the time of rest into the time of calculated estimate of energy expended, making it a work. And it says, when Jesus healed him, they went out, read chapter 3 of Mark, and took counsel with the Herodians how they would kill him. So that early, he's trying to say, even the Sabbath, the sacred Sabbath, we need to change it. And he did it by acting right in their faces, in front of them.
Thanks, Terry. I think we might be able to get Rosalie's message here. Rosalie, go ahead. See if we can hear you now. No, unfortunately not. But she did write, sorry, Rosalie, I can't hear you again, but she did write in her comment, and maybe you'd like to say something about it, Terry. Rosalie writes, I like Jim Wallace's definition of the difference between nonviolent protest and nonviolent resistance. Protest is saying no, like marches, vigils with signs, letters to the editors, etc. Resistance is acting no, like direct action with our feet, often resulting in jail or prison time in the tradition of Gandhi and in the footsteps of Jesus.
Well, that's why nonviolent direct action is, a preferred language for me, because actually, especially the way Gandhi practiced it, and you can see evidences of it. We can come back to that in the way that Jesus first appoints leaders and gets great grassroots support and then confronts the powers that be. But Gandhi always believed in layering on the pressure. Mm-hmm. And, it goes sort of in this way. If you think of Gandhi's basic question, how do 100,000 Brits control 250 million people in India, now over 1 billion? And he answered, we let them. And so Hannah Arendt said the Copernican revolution that came with Gandhi in understanding power, he flipped it. Everybody thinks power comes from the king, from the head of the mafia through the dons, down through the soldiers, from the president on down. And he said, no, power rises. Power rises. It all starts with us and our cooperation. So if you think of the first step of his campaigns, 1922, he says to the people, all right, let's stop cooperating. All you lawyers, leave the law. Hamstring the judicial system. All you chiefs who are cooperating with the political system, leave it. All you teachers, leave the schools, start your own. And all you people who are buying foreign cloth, stop buying it. All you who are buying liquor, stop buying it. Revenue plummeted. The government was hamstrung. And then Gandhi said, are you ready to negotiate? Because it was all about getting somebody to the table, not dominating, not winning, but solving it, making people friends, if you could. Are you ready to negotiate? They said, Brits said, nope, no way. You keep that up, you're in trouble. So what did he do next? He dramatized. I love the interview of Martin Luther King in front of a Sunday morning show when he was asked, we see why you could do strikes, but you're out there on the streets. And he said, we need to dramatize. It takes him about a minute to say the word. I loved it. But Gandhi said that, yeah, all that we need to get everybody aware of the real situation. We need to, and that's why in 1930, he's named the Person of the Year by Time magazine. And there are 1,000 reporters from all over the world witnessing the Salt March because it's a brilliant symbolic action. So the dramatizing, you watch any successful campaign, it starts with an injustice, you organize around it, you don't cooperate, and then you have so many people understand the situation and what's going on. And you try to undercut the support that the oppressors have. You saw it clearly, the example of South Africa, Springboks not able to, the best rugby team in the world, not able to participate outside their own country. And people beginning to turn on South Africa because of the dramatization. So when people, you know, sort of say, oh, marching, no, if it's part of a disciplined, increasingly powerful campaign. So after the dramatization of the Salt March, they said, are you ready to negotiate? And they said, no. Okay, next thing, we will civilly disobey and will break laws and will be willing to suffer. And there's such a wonderful theme in Gandhi's thought about the power of suffering. We can come back to that. It's not just willing to suffer for the sake of suffering. It's to reach. There's a power in it to reach. No, you're not somebody to be afraid of. You are somebody standing for something important. And so that's another layer that begins to make things change in the oppressor or the opponent. So all those steps, non-cooperation, dramatization, civil disobedience, willingness to suffer, and always coming back. Are you willing to negotiate now? And finally, after they had put hundreds of thousands of people in jail and were firing on the crowds, and they were finally revealed to the world who they were. Not the beneficent British Raj, but they were there just for sweat labor and natural resources, their own worth, and their violence proved to the world that they were not. They were the most powerful empire in the world, and they'd achieved that through violence. And that even the middle class in India finally understood who the Brits were, and increasingly would not cooperate, and they left. He defeated, through nonviolence, the biggest empire the world had ever seen to that point. So I appreciate the distinction that it's not, that it's much more assertive than that, but it's assertive on a lot of fronts. And a campaign that is designed to layer on different power has much greater chance of succeeding.
Thanks, Terry. I think related to that in certain way is a question Nate Bacon wrote in, and I'll just go ahead and read the first one. He's got two questions, but we'll get to the first one. He says, on a strategic level, Gandhi seems to have been a master at finding the particular pressure points where the violence of the empire against the poor could be exposed and paraded before the world by means of disciplined nonviolent action. Considering the empire of today of powerful super militarized nations such as the US and a small group of extremely wealthy who pull the strings in the world, what kind of strategic actions would you imagine Gandhi engaging in today?
I think he would pick an issue. Our world is, especially the U.S., is so committed to violence as the answer. To turn that around is not, of course, an easy, but to pick an objective. Do we want nuclear weapons eliminated? Stay with that. There had been great success to stop nuclear testing by united, coordinated action. You can start just about anywhere. A coordinated campaign to not let us spend $1 trillion redoing, in quotes, upgrading our nuclear weapons system with the whole triad of submarines, same missiles and new ones, and bombers. Why? I mean, so, even that, you can see what a tremendous challenge that would be, let alone to overcome the entire military industrial complex. I think he'd start on something that does have resonance that people can immediately understand. If you care about the environment, why not work on the issue of the biggest polluter in the world as a single coordinated entity is the American military. So I appreciate the importance of the question, and I wish I was a Gandhi and could pick just exactly the chink in the armor that might make the whole thing fall apart, but I don't think it's going to happen that way, but it can happen. One more thought: resist the endorsement of building a stronger Pacific fleet. I just heard the head of the Pacific Fleet, the man who's in charge, talking about that and talking about, China has added some ships to its navy. To stand back and say, wait, we've thought the Pacific is an American lake and that Japan is our fixed source of bombers, and we have thousands and thousands of troops there even now, and we say, well, it's not just to protect our way of life, although he did say that that's why we think it's so important to stay dominant over China, because only we have the principles and the goodwill to keep the shipping lanes open for everybody's benefit. Well, it seems to be overestimating our character. So, I don't know. There's any number of issues to focus on.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. If there are any other quick questions, we've got a few more that have come in. I know one question, though, that I was hoping you could maybe just say a little bit about, Terry, was in the book you wrote that Gandhi embodied Hinduism for millions of Indians. He said he used their stories and the images and the language that the common people understood. As a result, his appropriation of his Hinduism came to have a great political impact. And part of me is wondering when I read that, well, what is our common language today? The U.S. is not, is a much more secular country today. The Christian language is not so understood by the country as it maybe once was in King's time, perhaps. I wondered if you had any thoughts around that.
It's an excellent question. And that's where the just war theory and natural law thinkers, do some good. They try to establish, well, if you really think there should be proportionality, let's see what the good that's going to come from this war is versus the harm. And that having a common language like that is a benefit. But I come at your question from a different point of view. I think that if Christians, and we're working, on Catholicism, our meeting in Rome through the Pontifical Peace and Justice Institute, asked by the Pope to help think through nonviolence. And we asked him then to issue an encyclical. He hasn't yet, but he did give his marvelous January 1st talk on nonviolence. It's just phenomenal. So have my eye on Catholic, but of course it's all Christians. If the Catholic Church made a deep commitment again, and the letter we wrote said, asking Catholic Church to recommit to the centrality of nonviolence, and then lived it creatively, and did many initiatives out of that spirit and with that understanding. For example, an initiative like the Nonviolent Peace Force, which I assume most of you would know about, founded a number of years ago, now in South Sudan, started in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. It is in Syria, and they are people who unarmed civilian peacekeepers who stand with people who are under the threat of violence and prevent violence. They would testify if they were armed, they would be killed. But the unarmed, the non-violent peace force is now being appreciated and funded by the United Nations. They've demonstrated a more effective, nonviolent alternative. Not saying peacekeeping teams from the UN haven't done a lot of good, they have, but another whole way of doing it. If we were acting according to the Sermon on the Mount, we would have all kinds of demonstration projects. Our imaginations would be finally released to do this kind of thinking and experimenting and organizing. So we don't need a common language necessarily. We need to demonstrate that nonviolence is effective.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Oh, so we've got a good group on the call here. Those of you who are on video, again, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll go ahead and call on you. If you are calling in, you don't have video, maybe you can try to do the chat function. There's a little chat button under there, and then write in something to the group that might help us get to your questions. One of the questions that, the second question, Nate Bacon wrote in, let me go ahead and read that.
Okay.
He writes, in this violently polarized political era in the US, considering the deep spirituality of Gandhi and his consistent love of and belief in the possibility of conversion of his oppressors, what might a Gandhian lens offer us in finding a way of quote unquote muscular nonviolent action, but with consistent love and belief in the possibility of conversion of the powerful and the oppressors?
Well, I think we all get a chance to work at that every day under this current administration. Muscular nonviolent action, I would, again, it can't be vis-a-vis people who hold different points of view. I find it, but to continue to accept them and continue to look for common ground with them is, incumbent on us. They're not evil if, they support Trump or any other political issue that you could name. And to understand where they're coming from, how they got there. That Hillbilly Elegy book, was helpful to a lot of people. reading it, just understanding more the culture. I remember the senator from Virginia who wrote his book talking about Virginians and West Virginians. So important to understand that history, especially of involvement in the military. But, I think Nate's asking for more than that, way of muscular nonviolent action, meaning how would we organize to get things moving? And I think, again, pick an issue and let's go at it. And hopefully demonstrate that the results of what we are producing are meaningful and helpful to a wide swath of people. So the demonstration project, is an important thing.
I think related to what you were saying in terms of picking an issue, Veronica Pelikark wrote that she says she thinks the genius of Gandhi is that he touched something that is real to every citizen. Her thinking was that the issue of like nuclear weapons is not that real to many people here, at least in the US. So how could we think of something so direct that everyone would wake up to the necessity of the change?
Well, the environment certainly seems to be a candidate for that. It's just hard to ignore its importance, especially to young people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks, Terry. Are there any other questions at the moment from any of those who are on video? Yeah, let's go to Miles. Hi, Miles. Let me. I'll go ahead and unmute you. There we go. Miles, go ahead.
Hi, Terry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, I really enjoy these. I'm sorry I'm a little late to today's gathering. Terry, with respect to Gandhi and the Bible, I came across something curious, and that is Genesis 1:28, chapter 1, verse 28. There's two different versions of this scripture that I've come across. The Bible that I have currently says, God blessed them and said to them, quote, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish and the sea and the birds in the air. Now, another version of the Bible that I have, it has rather be fruitful and increase in number, replenish the earth. And, the Bible talks about one of the things we're called to is two laws that are to love God and the Creator and love each other. And then and that those commands relate to the word submission. So there's this intersectionality between the Bible and Gandhi, and I just wondered if you would comment about this difference between the word fill the earth as opposed to replenish the earth.
Unfortunately, my Hebrew is not good enough to make a judgment on what the fundamental word was. It's obviously somebody is looking at the word and understanding it according to their own lights. That attitude towards power, that we dominate, that translates then into make it submissive to your will. The tradition that says we are stewards of creation, leads you to say, don't destroy it, make it, replenish itself. So it's a very good observation about those two translations, but I think they say more about the translator than they do about the text.
Thanks, Terry. We have another question from Scott Brown. Scott, go ahead. I've got your mic unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Terry, I'm thinking about Gandhi's emphasis on self-purification.
Yes.
as a foundation for actually in being able to engage nonviolently. And I haven't read your books, and it hasn't come up yet in the call. So I'm just curious how you treat that, how you think about that, and possibly even relating it back to Jesus.
Well, yeah, he was particularly struck. Of course, when he read the Sermon on the Mount the first time when he was a student in England, he had discovered a vegetarian restaurant and the people that went there, and he finally found some decent food to eat while he was studying for the bar. But people that went there had embraced vegetarianism, but also appreciated much about the religions of the East. And so they gave him, for the first time, he read the Bhagavad Gita, his own Bhagavad Gita, and they gave him a Bible. And that's when he read, he said he fell asleep reading Numbers and Leviticus. But when he got to the Sermon on the Mount, it went straight to his heart. And it was, he read it almost every day as part of their daily prayer in the ashram. And his, how it relates to Jesus. And he found the temptations in the desert. He saw all that as Jesus getting ready, an important purification in order for him to jump in and start his public life. He found that instructive. Your point about his own self-purification, my goodness. In that same year, 2006, he came back from the Zulu Wars, which he led in the ambulance corps of 100 different Indians to take care of the injured on both sides. He was given a medal from the earlier, doing the same thing during the Boer War. But he came back from the Zulu conflict, and he said, if I'm going to serve people, humanity, until then, you saw Gandhi always dressing to the nines as a very natty, successful lawyer. And he made such a lifestyle change in 2006. So you see him forever after in that simple homespun cotton dhoti outfit. And they took 16 vows in their ashram. Ones we're familiar with, but more than that. Control of the palate was one. Non-acquisitiveness was another, and so on. So, and he just believed that if the truth was going to work through him, he needed to be as fit an instrument as he could be. Never tell a lie, because truth is God in all of its manifestations. Not God is truth. Truth is God. And his story of his experiments with truth is the name of his autobiography. So, yeah, self-discipline in order to continue to, it's just like, I was so impressed reading Dr. King and Ralph David Abernathy. They were arrested 13 times together, and every time they knelt down in the cell to pray that they would not turn into anger. Just constant sense of discipline. That's why when people don't appreciate the heroism Gandhi did, that nonviolence takes, everything about the hardihood of a soldier is just played out in spades almost in a nonviolent campaign. And you see the nuns kneel before the tanks in the Philippines resistance, offering rosaries. And, you see real heroism always. So thanks for commenting. If you want to say more about self-purification, self-discipline, I'm sure we'd be appreciative.
Scott, did
Well,
you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I just want to say thank you for that and for this. It really is touching me and at the heart level, and I appreciate that.
Thank
That's
you.
it. Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Scott. And just, Terry, when you were talking about heroism, I was thinking of something you wrote in the book about bravery, that violence and nonviolence require bravery, but nonviolence, bravery is the epitome of nonviolence and vice versa, because that's what it means in so much. And I thought that was really profound when I read that.
Yeah, he would say, if you can't be violent, you can't be nonviolent. And some people go, what? Yeah, he'd say, if you can't get so angry that you would be violent and stand up, if you can't do that, you can't be nonviolent, because it takes equivalent, if not more, bravery. The opposite, of course, is a coward.
Right, and you can't be nonviolent if you're a coward.
Right.
is what he said. Yeah.
Right.
Very good. Well, we need to wrap it up. Any last quick questions before we close this session? And I'm sure that if Terry has other questions, if you want to email me, we can get them on to Terry, and they'll be, I'm sure, more than willing to, as long as they're not too long, we can.
Rosalie, who was not able to be heard, I see has, question about Wolfgang Stevens' book on Gandhi and Jesus. And yes, I have read that and appreciated it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. I think she had to leave a little early, but well, Terry, I'm so grateful for your time spent with us this evening to share your wisdom and your thoughts. And maybe one of these next sessions, we can bring you back for your book on Jesus Christ, Peacemaker as well, to kind of continue that discussion. It's been enlightening for sure. And I thank you everybody as well for joining us. Terry, any final words for us?
No, but Pace Bene, keep it up, please. You're a demonstration project to all of us.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Terry. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.